Welcome to the channel. The focus of today's video is a South Dakota-class battleship USS Massachusetts. Affectionately nicknamed Big Mamie, Massachusetts saw her first combat during Operation Torch in November of 1942. She went on to serve extensively throughout the Pacific Theater, where she escorted the carriers of the U.S. Navy's Fast Carrier Task Force and lent her guns to numerous shore bombardment operations across the Central and Western Pacific.
Hi y'all, I'm Chris and I'm the creator behind the Valor Vault. First of all, I wanted to say a big thank you to everyone that has supported my channel over the last 2 years. None of the success that I have had could have happened without you and your support. With that being said, I'm making some changes to my channel, the first of which is, well, this. I finally have the ability, meaning the technology and space, to use my own voice. I'm also revamping the structure of my videos, which means that now I'm going to review the history of each warship and not bore you to death with the specs and text. However, I will be making a series of videos that focus on the design history, specifications, and weapon systems of each class or warship for those that desire that kind of information. Please let me know what you think of this move in the comments section. And with that all being said, let's get into today's video.
Massachusetts was commissioned into the United States Navy on May 12, 1942, with Captain Francis E. Maynard in command.
After fitting out and completing her shakedown cruise, she got on her way in late October to participate in the Allied invasion of North Africa.
Operation Torch, which was the code name for the North African invasion, kicked off on the morning of November 8, 1942. Massachusetts was assigned the job of neutralizing French defenses in the Casablanca area, which included the coastal guns of the El Hank battery to the west of Casablanca, as well as the French naval assets that were tied up inside Casablanca harbor, which included the incomplete 37,000-ton battleship Jean Bart.
Shortly after 7 o'clock that morning, Big Mamie unleashed the first 16 shells of her career in anger at the shore battery on El Hank Point. These also happened to be the first 16 shells sent downrange in anger by an American battleship during the war as well. The guns on El Hank Point responded in kind to Massachusetts, and after straddling her a few times, they managed to land a few hits. One shell exploded over the starboard side of her aft superstructure. While it peppered the decks below with shrapnel, it did not cause anything other than superficial damage. However, a second 7.6-inch shell managed to punch through her main deck on the port side between turrets 1 and 2. The damage from this hit was minor and contained to a lone berthing compartment below. The splinter damage from the aft hit and the repairs from the shell that penetrated the main deck are still visible today. Within minutes, Jean Bart took Massachusetts under fire. Now, while I admire the bravery and will of her crew to fight, engaging a fully operational battleship while possessing only a single functioning turret and no ability to maneuver was, at best, a questionable choice. As Massachusetts turned her attention toward the French battleship, the heavy cruisers Wichita and Tuscaloosa took over the bombardment of El Hank Point. Between 7:08 and 7:19, Jean Bart fired 4 two-gun salvos, one of which can be seen in this photo landing in close proximity to Massachusetts. Massachusetts shifted her fire to Jean Bart at 7:25 and in quick order scored a hit that penetrated one of the French battleship's 6-inch magazines. However, the magazine was empty as the guns, along with their ammunition, had been moved ashore during the previous weeks. Over the next 15 minutes, Jean Bart was struck several more times by shells from Massachusetts. One passed through her stack and struck the edge of her main deck, while another one punched through her outer plating and was deflected down by the armor belt. It then passed through the bottom of her hull before burying itself in the seafloor where it failed to explode. At 8:06, another salvo struck the ship. This one hit the barbette of Jean Bart's superfiring turret, although it failed to penetrate it. Second shell slammed into the operational turret's faceplate. It was this hit that jammed her turret in place, which effectively took her out of the action. One last shell from Massachusetts struck home 4 minutes later. It penetrated and exploded in a ballast compartment, which caused additional flooding. It could have been much, much worse for the French, though, as despite the hit she took, Jean Bart managed to elude serious damage. Several of Big Mamie's 16 shells failed to detonate due to their impact angles and obsolete fuses. The shell in this photo is actually one of those shells and is now currently on display at Battleship Cove. After putting Jean Bart out of action, albeit temporarily, Massachusetts turned her guns back toward El Hank Point. At about 9 o'clock, the French 2nd Destroyer Squadron attempted to slip out of Casablanca harbor under a smokescreen. Upon being alerted to this, Massachusetts took them under fire and scored several hits on the destroyers Milan and Foucault, which subsequently put both ships out of action. Over the course of the next several days, Massachusetts sank 4 merchant ships, a floating dry dock, and damaged multiple buildings, ships, and fortifications throughout her assigned area. With her part in the festivities completed, she got underway on November 12th for the United States. After an overhaul, which took up most of the winter, Massachusetts arrived in the South Pacific in early March of 1943. Over the next several months, she supported operations in the Solomons, which included covering the amphibious assault on New Georgia in late June and early July. From here, Massachusetts lived a rather mundane existence until early November, mostly training with the other fast battleships then in the Pacific theater. From November 19th through the 25th, she screened the carriers of Task Group 50.1 as they conducted strikes throughout the Marshall Islands to prevent Japanese forces in those locations from aiding their embattled pals in the Gilbert Islands. Massachusetts continued her screening duties until she was dispatched on December 6th along with Washington, North Carolina, Alabama, Indiana, and South Dakota to bombard Japanese installations on the island of Nauru. 2 days later, the 54 16-inch gun barrels of the 6 battleships roared to life in one massive salvo at 7 a.m. After pummeling the island for about 40 minutes, they retired and rejoined their respective carrier groups. Even though the phosphate mining and airstrip on the island were legit targets, honestly, the raid was more about seeing how well America's newest battle wagons could mesh together as a team.
Massachusetts was assigned to the Fast Carrier Task Force, better known as Task Force 58, on January 6, 1944. 10 days later, she departed Pearl Harbor for operations in the Marshall Islands. From January 30th to February 2nd, her guns supported the amphibious landings on the islands of Kwajalein and Royan and Moore. Her next action came in mid-February when Task Force 58 struck the Japanese stronghold at Truk Atoll during Operation Hailstone. After Truk, her task group moved on to the Mariana Islands, where they conducted strikes from February 21st to the 23rd, during which time Massachusetts helped fight off several concentrated air attacks. After a brief rest period, she took part in strikes on the Caroline Islands in late March before covering the invasion of Hollandia on the northern coast of New Guinea on April 22nd and 23rd. While retiring from the Hollandia operation, Task Force 58's battleships were dispatched on May 1st to shell the Japanese garrison on Pohnpei Island. Over the course of about an hour that afternoon, Massachusetts unloaded 87 high-capacity 16-inch rounds and 29 5-inch rounds into the island. Afterwards, she headed for the west coast of the United States, where on May 20th she entered the Puget Sound Navy Yard for an overhaul. After rejoining the fleet mid-August, Massachusetts conducted maneuvers and gunnery practice under the watchful eye of Vice Admiral Willis Lee until the second week of September, when she rejoined the Fast Carrier Task Force for strikes throughout the southern and central Philippines. In early October, the task force shifted north and conducted a series of strikes on Okinawa, Formosa, and Luzon. These strikes were aimed at paralyzing Japanese air power throughout the region ahead of amphibious operations on the island of Leyte. As those landings got underway on October 20th, Massachusetts was steaming east of central Luzon, and over the next several days her group provided both direct and indirect air support for the Leyte operation. On the morning of the 24th, support missions for the day were canceled after her task group was alerted to the presence of a powerful Japanese surface force moving through the Sibuyan Sea. The task group's planes subsequently spent the day striking this force, while Massachusetts helped fend off numerous attacks by Japanese land-based aircraft. As the 24th turned into the 25th, the 3 task groups of the Fast Carrier Task Force converged and began racing north to deal with an enemy carrier force that had been sighted that afternoon. Later in the morning, the commander of the U.S. Third Fleet, Admiral William F. Halsey, ordered the task force's battleships, including Massachusetts, to form up and steam out ahead of the carriers. His intentions were to have them move in and finish off the Japanese ships that were left over after the morning's carrier strikes. But at 11:15 that morning, just as the enemy force was almost within the range of their 16-inch guns, Halsey ordered his battleships to head south at flank speed towards the island of Samar. The U.S. 7th Fleet, which was conducting the landings at Leyte, had just fended off the surface force the 3rd Fleet had been attacking the previous day in the Sibuyan Sea. The carrier force Halsey was chasing was actually a decoy. Its sole reason for existing was to do exactly what it did: lure 3rd Fleet away from its Leyte responsibilities so that the surface forces could move in and pummel the beachhead. The plan would have worked if not for the valor and steadfast determination of the men of the United States 7th Fleet. The need to fuel their escorting destroyers ended up preventing Massachusetts and her cohorts from catching the fleeing Japanese. Massachusetts continued operating with the Fast Carrier Task Force over the next 2 months as it supported the capture of the Philippine archipelago by the U.S. Sixth Army. In early February of 1945, the Fast Carrier Task Force reverted back to 5th Fleet Command, and operations over the next month included multiple days of carrier strikes on the greater Tokyo area and supporting the invasion of Iwo Jima. After covering another round of carrier strikes on the home islands in mid-March, Massachusetts joined the pre-invasion shore bombardment of Okinawa on March 24th. Afterwards, she remained off Okinawa on carrier escort duty until late April. She spent much of this time fighting off aerial attacks, both conventional and of the kamikaze variety. Her deck logs note multiple calls to general quarters for air attacks almost every day, sometimes for hours on end, in addition to the routine dusk and dawn calls during which action was also frequently seen. By the middle of May, she was back off Okinawa. On the morning of June 5th, she rode out a powerful typhoon to the southeast of the island. 70-foot seas and 100-knot winds caused damage throughout the task force, but Massachusetts managed to come through, with the only casualty being one of her Kingfisher float planes that was battered beyond repair. On June 10th, she shelled Japanese facilities at Minami Yatoshima before retiring to Leyte for rest and upkeep. While at Leyte, Massachusetts was fitted with a Mark 15 20mm quad mount. In this photo, you can see the Mark 15 mount located on her starboard side just forward of turret number 3. The weapon, which was basically 4 20mm Oerlikons mounted together in a single unit, had been developed and used on PT boats during 1944. Massachusetts' job was to see if it could be of any use to the bigger boys of the fleet. Massachusetts was on escort duty again in early July for carrier strikes that concentrated on the greater Tokyo area. On July 14th, she was detached, along with her sisters in Indiana and South Dakota, 2 heavy cruisers and 9 destroyers, to bombard the industrial complex at Kamaishi, which included the Japan Iron Company and the Kamaishi Steel Works. The complex was Japan's second largest iron and steel manufacturing center. This is the actual film of that shore bombardment. 2 weeks later, she shelled the industrial facilities at Hamamatsu, and another attack on Kamaishi followed on August 9th, and it was here that Massachusetts let loose what is believed to be the final 16-inch shell fired in combat during World War II. 2 weeks after the Japanese capitulation, Massachusetts got underway for the United States. After an overhaul at the Puget Sound Navy Yard in Bremerton, Washington, she proceeded to the East Coast where she was decommissioned at Norfolk on March 27, 1947, and assigned to the Atlantic Reserve Fleet. While she sat in the Reserve Fleet, the Navy considered modernizing her several times. The idea that sticks out the most was devised in 1956 and centered on converting her into a guided missile battleship. But the $120 million cost proved to be much more than Congress was willing to allocate for the project. She would have had all 3 of her main battery turrets removed and replaced with missile launchers. Anti-submarine weapons would have been added, as well as equipment to handle helicopters. Massachusetts was ultimately stricken from the Naval Vessel Register on June 1, 1962. So, how was Massachusetts saved from the scrapper? Well, not long after being stricken, a group of former crewmen lobbied to have her preserved as a museum ship. These efforts led to the establishment of the Massachusetts Memorial Committee, and through the endeavors of this committee, which included a donation campaign by children throughout her state, very similar to the campaigns in North Carolina and Alabama for their respective battleships, they ended up successfully raising enough money to purchase Massachusetts from the Navy. On June 8, 1965, the Navy transferred ownership of the vessel to the state of Massachusetts, and 2 months later she was anchored in Fall River, Massachusetts, and open to the public. Located at Battleship Cove, she is dedicated as a memorial to the more than 13,000 Bay Staters from all branches of the military that gave the ultimate sacrifice during World War II. She also is located in the state's official memorials to the Korean War, the Vietnam War, the Persian Gulf War, and 9/11. Massachusetts was declared a National Historic Landmark on January 14, 1986. In 1998, she was towed to a Boston dry dock where repairs were made to her hull to help protect her from corrosion. Since she was decommissioned in 1947, she's still mostly in her wartime configuration and, much like North Carolina and her sister Alabama, serves as an excellent example of a World War II battleship. I have no official connection or affiliation with Battleship Cove, but I highly recommend you visit her if you can. In addition to Massachusetts, Battleship Cove is also the home of the Gearing-class destroyer Joseph P. Kennedy Jr., the submarine Lionfish, and a pair of PT boats, as well as numerous other exhibits. Massachusetts received 11 battle stars for her World War II service. If you made it this far, thank you, and if you enjoyed my video, please hit the like button, comment, and subscribe. And don't forget to hit that bell as well. Thank you, and I'll see you in the next video.